All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome back. This is episode 12, and we're going to cover a session from Lake Elsinore Casino. I just got back actually like 20 minutes ago, so the memory's fresh. We're just going to jump straight into the hands this time. I do have some things to say about the room, but I'm going to save those until the end of the video this time. We played 2-3, no limit, in for 300. Let's go. In the first hand, there's an early position raised to $7. One caller in between, and I look down at King Jack offsuit on the button. I think this is a good candidate to put into the 3-bet range, so I'm going to go ahead and attack that small sizing. I make it $30 to go. The early position raiser makes the call, and the player in between folds. So we're going heads up to a flop, which comes ace, king, 4, 2 clubs. He checks, I check it back. The turn is the 4 of diamonds, bringing in a second flush draw. He checks it again, and I think I'm actually ahead here, but there's still value to be had from a lot of draws. This turn card brings possible straight draws, possible flush draws, so I think a bet here is fine, and we could just check back brick rivers. So that's what I decide to do. I make it $35. He makes the call fairly quickly. The river comes the 10 of hearts. He checks. I check back, and we're good. He shows pocket sevens. So moving on to the next hand, scooping the first one. In the next hand, there's 5 limps, and we look down at pocket 8s from the big blind. I don't mind isolating, but I also just don't mind checking and playing a flop. This time I decide to check, so we go 5 ways to a flop, which comes pretty good. It's 9-8 deuce with 2 diamonds. I decide to lead into the field. I make it $10, being that the pot, I think after the rake, was around like 12 bucks at this point. The player on my left makes the call from a short stack, and now a middle position player min raises to $20. The action folds back to me, and I look at his stack. He has about 60 or 65 bucks left. I think it's an easy shove spot. Being out of position, I don't want any turn cards that kill the action, and he could also just be setting his own price to check back the turn with a variety of draws. I put in the raise to 75. The player to my left folds, and the middle position player fairly quickly makes the call for his remaining stack. The turn and river come out fairly clean. I show my hand, and we're good. So things going all right so far. Moving on to the next hand. In the next hand, there's an early position open to $12. We look down at 8-7 of diamonds, and with these types of holdings, I typically tend to just fold them pre-flop if my opponent has not very many big blinds left. But given that my opponent in this case has over 100 big blinds, I think it's more than okay to make the call. So I make the call, and the big blind calls as well from a short stack. Quick side note, the reason these hands are folds pre-flop versus a short stack is because you're just not getting the right implied odds to make the call. Even if you do make your hand, it won't happen frequently enough long-term to make that call profitable. So suited connectors, suited gappers, hands of that nature, I prefer to call only when I'm deep against deep stacked opponent. Moving on. The flop comes 10-9-9, and the early position player continues for $20. We flop an open-ender, and for similar reasons as to why we called pre-flop, we make the call here, and the big blind gets out of the way. So we're going heads up to a pretty sweet-looking turn, 6 of diamonds. We get there right away. Unfortunately, the early position player checks, so it's time to put in our own value bet this time. I make it $35. He thinks about it for a bit and makes the call. So heads up to a river. I'm hoping for a clean river that doesn't change too much, and that's what we get. 4 of diamonds doesn't change anything at all. He checks once more. I decide to put in a bet of $90. He thinks about it for a minute or two and makes the call. So given that we're not getting raised here, we're good. I show my hand, and we collect the pot. So far, so good. Let's see if we can keep this smooth sailing going at Lake Elsinore. In the next hand, under the gun opens to $15. We look down at 8-7 of clubs for middle position and make the call, and the small blind also makes the call. So we're going 3 ways to a flop, which comes Jack 9-4 with 1 club. Small blind checks, and under the gun continues for $20. I could definitely entertain a fold here, but I think it's also a good spot to float. There's a lot of turn cards that help us, and it's also just the fact that this board should favor our range more than an under the gun opener's range. I put in the $20. Unfortunately, the small blind puts in the check raise and makes it $65 with around $50 behind. Now the under the gun player makes the call and has around $150 left behind. So when the action gets back to me, I think it's actually a fold now because we just don't have enough behind to really maneuver any turns creatively. The small blind is most likely shipping any turn card, which leaves us in a kind of awkward situation if we were to call the extra $45 right now. So plan doesn't work out. I decide to let it go and live to see another hand. Next, it's time for pocket jacks. First to act. I make it $25, being that it's a straddled pot. The button makes the call and the straddle makes the call. Both of these players have around $300 or $400, so looking to tread lightly on dangerous boards. Luckily, the flop comes 9-6-3 rainbow, so fairly good flop for pocket jacks. Aside from maybe pocket nines, which we'll be up against some percentage of the time, there's not much to be worried about. So when it checks to me, I decide to continue for $55. The button thinks for a little bit and lets it go, and the straddler also lets it go. I think it's worth considering my sizing could have been a bit smaller here on such a dry board. Nonetheless, happy to take the pot down, move on to the next hand. In the next hand, under the gun opens to $9, and we look down at king, queen of spades from the cutoff. I think you could contemplate a 3-bet here, but I'm happy to just make the call and play in position. Everyone else folds, and we go heads up to a flop, which comes queen 10-5 with 2 clubs. The under the gun player quickly leads out for $16. Nothing to do here but make the call. The turn brings another 10, and he quickly leads out for $35. Pretty big bet given the pot size, but happy to make the call once again. It does seem a bit strange to me that he's leading pot on this turn, given that we could have some 10s in our range, but again, nothing to do but just call, so that's what I decide to do. The river comes a 6 of clubs, completing the flush draw, and he checks it over to us. I think for the most part, there's no need to turn this hand into a bluff. We could represent the clubs, but that's not something I'm looking to do in this spot. I check back, and we win against queen jack suited, so not 3-betting pre ends up working out for us pretty nice here. Moving on to the next hand.
Yeah, it was. And then I thought maybe it was on me.
No, it's on.
Alright, so here's the last interesting hand from this session. There's 3 limps, and I decide to overlimp 7-4 of hearts from the small blind. The big blind checks, so we're going multi-way to a flop, which comes 8-6 deuce with 2 hearts. So we flop a straight draw and a flush draw. I decide to lead out for $5. The big blind folds, and the under the gun player puts in a raise, but he makes it $14 to go. Folds back to me, and I think there's not much of a decision here. I make the call, and we're off to a turn, which is the 5 of diamonds, giving us the gut shot straight, fairly disguised straight. I check it over to him, and he puts out a bet of $25. He has around 130 or 140 left, so sizes are a little awkward here, given that a standard 3-bet size in this spot would commit most of his stack, but not all of it. I decide to make a smallish 3-bet and potentially just get stacks in right here on the turn. I make it $60 to go, and before I'm even done counting my bet, he slides all his chips across the line. I make the quick call, and he quickly shows us 8 deuce of diamonds. So we're not in amazing shape here. Luckily, the river's the ace of clubs, and we hold. So that wrapped up the session for us. So we played for around 2 or 3 hours, got into the game for $300 and out for $829 for a total profit of $529. Not bad for the first visit at Lake Elsinore. Before I wrap up this vlog, I just wanted to give my thoughts on the room really quick and let you guys know a little of what you should expect should you choose to come play over here. Let's start with the pros. Number 1 and number 2 and number 3, this is huge for me, is gonna be the games. They're just really good games. There's a lot of rec players, a lot of action, good vibes overall, not a lot of grinders, not a lot of headphones, not a lot of sunglasses, no iPads. Secondly, the people there are just very nice overall from what I experienced. Players and staff alike, everyone was very respectful and very kind, and just kind of a pleasure to be around. No complaints in that department. Another thing I noticed is, although the room isn't huge as far as how many tables they have, it's very spacious. Something to consider if you don't like being uncomfortable and cramped when playing your poker sessions. They also have a bar / restaurant, cafe type thing going on in the room right next door, which offered a really wide selection of beers and also a wide selection of food. I had my lunch there with a friend right after the session, had a pretty good time, so that's something to consider if you guys are going to be grinding out those comp reward points on your player's card. Alright, so the negatives of this place, number one is going to be the area / property. It's just not very nice. If you look at it from the outside, you can hardly tell that it's a casino. Like, you'd never know if you're just driving by. Something else I noticed is the chips are all different widths, ever so slightly. They're not consistent in their size. And when you're filling up a rack, you can actually fit 21 or sometimes 22 chips per row in those plastic racks, which leads to a lot of confusion and it's kind of inconvenient. Lastly, another pet peeve I found was the $1 chips. So playing $2, $3 no limit, even if you're in for 300, they make you buy in with $1 chips. I don't know, I just think it's a bit annoying having to calculate pot sizes and stack depths with $1 chips and $5 chips. It's just not how I'm used to playing 2-3 or even 2-5 no limit. So it's just something I noticed. Not a huge fan of the $1 chips. Overall, I think this room is actually underrated by the poker community. I had a really good time. The people are really nice. The cards, the chips, the felt, it all feels like decent quality. So yeah, there's not too much I didn't like about this place. I'm gonna give this place a 7 out of 10, my own personal rating. If you guys are ever in the area, I highly recommend you check it out. Go play a session, see what you think. Alright, so that wraps up another poker vlog. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. To those of you that like the video and leave comments, I really appreciate that. It helps the channel grow. Thanks again. I'll see you guys next time. Good luck out there. Peace.